Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. The Abridged version. Chapter 8. Frankenstein Goes Home. A letter from my father was waiting for me when I got home. I happily tore it open and found that it contained bad news. I read my father's words slowly. There is no easy way for me to tell you this, but your brother William is dead. Tears sprang to my eyes. The family had taken their usual walk after dinner. The evening was warm and calm, so they decided to stay out longer than usual. My father and Elizabeth walked behind William and Ernest. Instead of trying to catch up to them, they decided to sit and wait for the boys to return. When Ernest found them, he explained that William had run off to hide, and he couldn't find him anywhere. My father and Elizabeth were scared. They started looking for him right away. They spent hours and hours looking, but they couldn't find him. The police were called and a search party was put together. Everyone spent the night looking for William. They searched high and low, every place a small boy would hide, but with no luck. No one said anything, but they all feared something terrible had happened to poor William. It was an awful night for Elizabeth, my father wrote. In the early hours of the morning, my father discovered my brother. His worst fears had come true. My brother was no longer alive. My father was very upset. Everyone was. Come home, Victor, my father's letter continued. You are the only person who can help Elizabeth through this hard time. Elizabeth had taken the news harder than any other member of the family. She thought it was her fault. That morning she had given William a gold locket that had belonged to our mother. She thought the jewelry must have been the cause of this terrible accident. William must have gotten in the way of a thief trying to take the locket. If she had not given it to him, he would still be alive. I put the letter on the table and started to cry. Victor, Henry said, what's wrong? Has something happened? I couldn't speak, so I handed him the letter. Oh no, Henry exclaimed. What are you going to do? I must go home right away, I answered. My family needs me, and I need to be there with them. I quickly packed a bag. There was little time to be neat. I threw things in every which way, trying not to think about my poor brother. Henry helped me out. I asked the woman in charge of the apartment to pack a lunch, which she did happily. Together we organized my books, papers, and clothes for the trip back to Geneva. Henry was going to stay on in my rooms at Ingolstadt. He had to continue with his studies, and that was fine with me. I did, however, lock my laboratory and take the key with me. I didn't want Henry going in there whilst I was gone. We walked slowly and with heavy hearts to the carriage. Henry gave me a long hug and said a tearful goodbye. Tell your family I send my love, Victor. I'm so sorry for what happened. I will, Henry. You're a good friend. I will miss you terribly. There was nothing else to say, so I climbed on board. The driver called out to the horses, and we were away. I turned around to look out the window down Henry. At the window at Henry. He stood there long after the carriage rode away, waving. Tears fell down his face. I wept for my dear, sweet brother. I thought of my mother, and I felt sorry for myself, how I had let my family down, how I should have been there for them during this awful time. I just hoped it wasn't too late. The carriage was warm and comfortable, but my 3-day trip was full of pain. 6 years had passed since I had seen my hometown. When I saw the top of Mount Blanc, I began to cry. My country, my beloved country. As we drew closer to the home, the day turned to night. The city gates were closed by the time we arrived in Geneva. The carriage turned around and brought me to Secheron, a small town about a mile away, where I stayed the night. When I stepped out of the carriage and stretched, I looked up and saw a clear sky with lots of stars. The weather was in my favor. My legs were restless from so much traveling, and I knew I would never sleep. I decided to visit the spot where my father had found William. With the city gates closed, I needed to cross Lake Geneva by boat. Luckily, I could borrow one from the inn where I was staying. During my short trip, the weather quickly took a turn for the worst. Lightning flashed in the sky that had been calm just minutes before. Rain started to fall. I rowed as hard as I could to get to land. The heavens clouded up, and it was hard to see my way. Thunder burst overhead as I pressed on toward land. I landed on the beach and dragged my boat out of the water. I tied it up and ran into the woods. I had a basic idea from my father's letter of where the crime had taken place, and started off in that direction. "Oh, William," I exclaimed, "you poor darling boy." As these words left my lips, I saw a figure run away from behind the trees. I stood completely still. Could it be? Yes, it was the monster, that awful creature to whom I had given life. At once I knew he was the one who was guilty. He alone took William's life. Oh, cursed monster! My teeth started to chatter. My legs felt weak. I leaned on a tree for support. And tried to take a deep breath. I watched as the creature quickly ran away. I started to chase after him, even though my legs felt funny. Small brushes hit my legs, and I almost tripped on a number of rocks. I ran as fast as I could. The monster jumped over fallen trees and ducked under branches. I tried as hard as I could, but I couldn't catch him. He reached the top of the small forest and disappeared. I sank down beside a tree as the rain continued. I was getting wetter and wetter, but I couldn't move. What did the monster want? Was this his first crime? How many other people had he hurt? I spent a cold, wet night in the open air. When day dawned, I made my way back in the inn and returned the boat. I decided to walk the rest of the way home. It would give me time to think. The carriage was to bring my bags to my home. My mind raced. How could I explain to my father what had happened? How could I tell him that I had created a man, a monster from parts? How could I tell him that this monster had killed William and was hiding somewhere on Mount Blanc? I would sound like a crazy person. No, I needed to keep my secret to myself for now. There was no other choice. As I walked up our road, I noticed that very little had changed. The house looked and felt the same, and that was comforting. I quickly opened the front door and walked inside. I found my brother Ernest already awake and sitting in the living room. "Welcome home, Victor." He smiled faintly. "I'm sorry your homecoming is so sad." When I opened up my arms, Ernest almost fell into them and started to cry. I was in pain too. If I had not driven myself so hard, this never would have happened. It's all my fault. My 2 hands had ruined Lovely home. My work had caused the sadness my family now felt. "How are Father and Elizabeth?" I asked him. Ernest wiped his eyes and tried to stand up strong. "They are sad, but now that the criminal has been caught..." "Caught?" I interrupted. "What do you mean? I saw him walking free last night." My brother looked confused. "No," he said, "it's Justine, William's nanny. She's been accused and is in jail as we speak. They arrested her last night." Justine? Now it was my turn to be confused. "That sweet girl? No, she's not guilty. There must be some mistake." Ernest sat down on the couch and explained what happened. After my father returned with the bad news, Justine fell ill. Her fever continued for days. My father called the doctor, but he couldn't find anything wrong with her. One of the maids had found our mother's locket in the pocket of her skirt. She was taking Justine's clothes to be cleaned when it fell out. The maid didn't say anything to the family, but went straight to the police. When they came to question her, Justine simply cried. My brother continued. She was so confused and upset that they decided she must be guilty. My father came in as we were talking. He looked worn down and tired, but he smiled warmly when he saw me. "My son," he said, "I am glad you're home." I hugged him tightly. "Father!" Ernest exclaimed. "Victor knows who killed William." "Alas," my father said, "so do we, and I would have much rather not known. It's upsetting to think that somebody that we treated like family could do something so terrible." "But father," I said, "Justine is innocent." I longed to tell him everything about the monster, and about how my experiment had gone so very wrong, but I just couldn't. Not without him being angry with me. "Well, I hope you are right," he said. "Her trial starts today." I looked up to see Elizabeth come into the room. Time has been kind to her. In spite of her obvious sadness, she had grown from a lovely young girl into a beautiful woman. The love I had for her swelled my heart. We embraced Elizabeth. Like my father and brother said, she was glad I was home. Ernest quickly told her about our conversation. Elizabeth turned to me. "Victor, we must save Justine." "I can't believe she did it." "I won't believe she did it." She sat down on the couch, took her handkerchief out of her pocket, and wiped away her tears. "She was such a sweet girl," Elizabeth continued, "and she loved William as if he were her own brother. There is no way she could have hurt him. I can't imagine what the police are thinking." Elizabeth started to cry again, and I put my hand on her shoulder. "Elizabeth, please be still. Justine is innocent. There is nothing to be afraid of. She won't be going to jail. I made myself a silent promise to do everything I could to make up for all of my actions, to make up for what I had put my family through. They didn't deserve to suffer because I had made so many mistakes. There, I said to Elizabeth. Everything is going to be okay. I smiled warmly at her and held her hand. I promise. My father added, we must trust our legal system to do the right thing. The truth will come out, that's certain. With those final words, my family and I went into the dining room for breakfast. It was a silent meal. In my heart I knew they were thinking about poor William and about how sad my mother would have been if she were here. But my mind kept coming back to one chilling thought. Where was the monster now?